we wait?
Okay, Sujit.
I think we can start. Members will join.
Good morning, members. Welcome to today's VCM on a class-by-class analysis of Form 3CD and 3CB by Sri Watson sir. Now, I would like to welcome our branch chairman Sujit Kumar Jain and our Sikasa chairman Lakshmi Prasanna Garu today for today's session. I take this opportunity to thank Srivatsan sir for giving his valuable time to our Nellore branch members and enlightening us on today's topic. With this, I would like to start our session. Now I request our branch AO Sravan to please play Institute Motto song. And I request all the members to raise for the Institute Motto song. Thank you.
य एष सुप्तेषु जाग्रति य एष सुप्तेषु जाग्रति कामं 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 कामपुरुषो पुरुषो निर्मिमाणः निर्मिमाणः तदेव शुक्रं तदेव तद्ब्रह्मा तद्ब्रह्मा तदेवामृतमुच्यते तस्मिन् लोकः शतः सर्वे तदूनात्यपि कश्चन एतद्द्वैता 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 एतद्द्वैता.
Thank you, members. Now I request our branch chairman, Mr. Sujit Kumar Jain, to give his opening remarks.
Good morning, members. I welcome all of you to today's seminar on the issues in tax audit. Tax audit is basically a topic which is very nearer to our heart. Are you getting echo? Okay. Because I am experiencing some echo while I'm speaking. So, as I said, the topic is very nearer to our heart.
Sujit, if you excuse me, Sravan, please unmute everyone. Mute everyone.
So, as we know that the new income tax website has started working, I think many of us are able to file the returns now. Now is an apt time for us to refresh and rebrush our skills regarding the tax audit. Many of you might have already finalized the cases but not have filed them. But after today's session, you may be in a position to start filing the tax audit report and subsequently the returns also. One more announcement I have to make is on October 2nd, as part of the 70-year celebration of all the regional council, the SARC has requested all the branches to conduct a blood donation camp. So in line with that, the Nellore branch is also conducting a blood donation camp for members as well as students at the Indian Red Cross Society Blood Bank near Madras Bus Stand Center on October 2nd from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. I request all the members to participate in that program and also encourage your article students who are on leave or at office to come down to that day and donate blood in huge numbers. So that would be a great service to the society. So I request all of you once again to make the occasion a grand success. Thank you, everyone. And once again, I would like to thank our faculty for accepting our invitation and taking today's session. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Sujit. Now I request our Sikasa chairman, Mr. Lakshmi Prasanna Garu, to introduce our faculty to the audience. Madam, you have to unmute.
Okay. Now audible. Now it is audible.
Ma'am, you are audible, but your
No.
video is not working, I think.
Video is not working.
Yes.
Okay, now it is okay.
Okay.
Good morning. And now I am going to introduce our faculty. Yes, Srivatsan sir. He is a BCom graduate and he qualified CA in 1977 and 1980. He has also an IS auditor and CISA certificate holder, and he is in practice since 1981 as a partner in Messrs. Sethuraman and Srivatsan. He has presented technical papers on taxation and accounting standards in various seminars. He is a speaker in CPE meetings of SRC of ICAI and its branches in Tamil Nadu. He has been the chairman of Trichy branch of the Institute of Chartered Accountants of India for 3 years and its secretary for 10 years and served as a co-opted member of the Southern India. He had organized the training sessions for ISA for the first tone in India. Thank you. With this, I welcome our faculty, Srivatsan sir, to continue the technical session.
Thank you, ma'am. Sir, the floor is yours. You can unmute and you can start with your lecture, sir. Sir, you have to unmute, sir.
Am I audible now?
Yes, sir, you are audible.
Yes. Good morning to everyone. I thank all of you for having participated in this session or joined this session on a Sunday when everybody wants to relax, because that's a chartered accountants work almost 12 hours a day, and Sunday is the only day where they can spend with their families, and you are sacrificing some of your precious family time and joining the meeting to enable us to learn more. It's a very, very appreciable factor, and thank you for having joined the meeting. I thank the management committee of Nellore branch for having given me this opportunity to share my thoughts on the classes of Form 3CD. Mr. Sujit was very optimistic that we will be able to file the Form 3CD right away after the session. Ladies and gentlemen, the website of the Income Tax Department is still not permitting us to get the Form 3CD uploaded. We have got already several Form 3CDs ready, but we are not able to upload. And the date of signing the audit report will be the date on which the client approves. So even if you date the audit report today, we are giving audit reports even today in a physical form, in a paper form, so that the clients can submit it to the banks and financial institutions for renewal of their limits. But so far as the income tax department is concerned, the audit report will be signed only on the day when the client approves. Now, this will also have a problem in our UDIN generation. But I am of the opinion we already signed and generated the UDIN, and that's it. The UDIN is the same, irrespective of the date in which it is uploaded. Everywhere there is a problem, but we are there only to resolve the problem, not cry about the problem. That has been the attitude of chartered accountants all through. Let us go into the day's session. Is my slide visible, sir? Hello?
Not it, sir. Not it.
Not it.
Sir, please share the screen once again, sir.
I thought I had set it up already. Now?
Now it is coming, sir.
Yeah.
Yes, sir. Now it is okay.
Okay. So we will continue with the topic of the day straight away. First and foremost, when we take up a tax audit, we have to look at the basics where, see, most occasions, what happens is the basic principles, in every facet of our life, we take the basic principles or basic things for granted. And then we gloss over the basic things, and ultimately we do something without complying with the basic things. It happens in everybody's life and in every facet of life, not only in profession. Basics are taken for granted. So as a professional, we have to be a little more diligent. So whenever you take up a tax audit for the first time, take an engagement letter from the client. This engagement letter must be there so that you are going to take up the tax audit based on the engagement, and you should keep it on your permanent file. This is a basic requirement. And you should also understand and appreciate this tax audit is a general purpose financial statement, audit of general purpose financial statement, and SCA 700 is applicable. I have not seen a single tax audit report issued where we have described the responsibility of the management and responsibility of the auditors on the face of the tax audit report. The guidance note of the institute says that it should be on the face of the auditor's report in the observation clause. Here, I have myself made a mistake as against the institute's recommendation. I used to annex it as an annexure, but it is not a recommended method. It should be part of the, it should be on the face of the auditor's report in Form 3CB, that what is the responsibility of the management and what is the responsibility of the individual responsibility statement must be given in Form 3CB itself in the observations column. When one takes up the audit, he should also remember the accounting standards are applicable to tax audit also. I have seen, this is the first time I am addressing a branch outside Tamil Nadu. So I have addressed a seminar or two in Kerala, but I have not addressed any branch in Andhra Pradesh. I am not aware whether the statements which are issued by the chartered accountants in your area carry the previous year comparables so far as the financial statements are concerned. I have noticed across Tamil Nadu, especially in smaller towns of Tamil Nadu, that chartered accountants do not furnish the previous year figures in of the financial statements. So I have been always advising them to incorporate it, and it is not required by the Income Tax Act, but it is part of the standards, and it is a compulsory disclosure which one has to make in the financial statements. So I assume that there can be omissions in that part of the country also, and please enter the previous year financial comparables in the profit loss account and the balance sheet, and all standards are applicable. Therefore, there should be a notes to accounts. Whenever you issue a Form 3CD or Form 3CB and Form 10B, which is an audit for charitable institutions and trusts, there should be a proper notes to accounts, which should be signed by the management. See, this notes to accounts issue has been always a problem before the disciplinary committee. There had been cases where a person had been found guilty for not having issued a simple notes to accounts because of the disputes among the trustees. So to safeguard yourself from such embarrassments, especially when the directors fall apart or when the partners fall apart, they might accuse the chartered accountant because it's an easy target, it's a soft target. And in order to protect ourselves from any such action, please issue the notes to accounts along with every audit report which you are signing. It is a very essential part, and the institute in its wisdom says that it is essential. See, whatever the Form 3CD and Form 3CB, which is giving all the information what is to be furnished in the notes to accounts. If you will see, there is a ICDS disclosure as part of Form 3CD. There is a disclosure in Form 10B also regarding the method of accounting. In all these cases, despite all these things, the institute is of the opinion that there should be a separate notes to accounts, and though it is the management responsibility, it should be attached by the auditor who signs the balance sheet. Now, these two basic things are very, very essential and which is very often not followed. So please follow these basic things. Regarding the applicability of the accounting standards for non-corporates, the institute has classified the entities into 4 categories, 4 levels. Class 1, entities with turnover over 250 crores or borrowings over 50 crores. There can be firms and even some proprietary companies which are doing turnover of more than 250 crores. There can be many firms which do more than 250 crores in any part of the country. See, these firms are subject to and they are governed by all applicable accounting standards, AS 1 to 29, and there should be a proper notes to accounts that all these accounting standards are complied with, and it should be attached with the Form 3CB and 3CD. It should be a separate annexure because Form 3CB, 3CD do not require it, but Institute's guidance note requires it. So it should be made as an annexure. And class 2 are companies, entities which have turnover of less than 250 crores, but more than 50 crores. These companies do not have to prepare the cash flow statement. They do not have to prepare the segment reporting and earnings per share. Of course, firms, you don't have to report the earnings per share. And there is some exemption in employee benefits standards, that is, the provision for gratuity need not be made or need not be disclosed. This is exempted from provision for gratuity. And there is no disclosure requirements regarding leases, impairment of assets, and provisions and contingencies. But while this mandate from the institute excludes level 2 entities from disclosure of provisions and contingencies, the Form 3CD mandates that the ICDS requires the disclosure of provisions and contingencies and the movement of provisions. So, though it is exempted by the conditions for non-corporate companies, non-corporate entities, it is applicable for as per Form 3CD. Then class 3, turnover between 10 to 50 crores and borrowings between 1 to 10 crores, 2 to 10 crores. All exemptions of the class 2 is available. Further, this AS 18 related party disclosure, AS 24 disclosure for there is an exemption for disclosure for plant, property and equipment. You need not make the disclosure regarding plant, property, equipment and the effects of foreign exchange transactions reflected in the financial statements. These two are additional exemptions for class 3 companies. Class 4 companies are the residuary classes which have lot of exemptions, like AS 13 is not applicable, AS 28 is not applicable. There, AS 28 disclosure was not required. Here, AS 28 itself is not applicable. All these things we have to take into consideration before embarking on the tax audit per se. First thing, you will have to identify what are all the accounting standards that are applicable to the audit and ensure that the applicable accounting standards are complied with, and make a proper note that all these things are complied with or not complied with in your audit report. Another tricky situation which we will face while undertaking a tax audit, we could be a relative of the organization, either the partner or the proprietor or somebody closely connected with them. In that event, we should not accept the audit of such entity. Suppose you are going to take up an audit of a trust. If you are donated to the trust more than 50,000, you are not entitled to hold the office of the auditor. Or there can be some trust where they will invite you to be on the board. You will be part of some service organization. You might be a member, life member of some club. In all these cases, you are disqualified from accepting the audit. You have to engage somebody else to do the audit, and you cannot do the audit and sign, because these are all disqualifications which we, as I told you earlier, certain basic things we tend to gloss over, and because they are all non-corporates, we tend to gloss over certain basic things. Please do not gloss over these basic things and ensure that you are not signing an audit report where you are disqualified to hold office. Now, who is subject to audit? A person who has a turnover, every person who has a turnover of 1 crore or above is subject to tax audit. The turnover limit is 1 crore. There is a proviso to this subclass which says if all the receipts and payments, understand the word, all the receipts and payments which had happened during the year is made only by account payee, check or bank draft or banking channels, except for 5%, then the turnover limit goes up to 10 crores. Here, as against 44 AD, it talks of all receipts and payments. All receipts, including realization of sales, including realization, a payment of purchases. So that means if somebody has brought in some capital in cash, that or any capital expenditure or anything, whether it is depreciation is allowable or not, that's a different issue. Whether he has incurred certain expenditure on capital side also in cash, that has also to be reckoned to find out the 5% margin of not having incurred more than 5% by way of cash. So you'll have to take into consideration both the revenue receipts and the revenue payments and the capital receipts and the capital payments. So it will be in the interest of the tax auditor to prepare a receipts and payments account to find out what are all the cash payments, what are all the payments, both for capital and current account. So this is one important thing. Second is when what is the turnover? That there itself we have a stumbling block. Turnover is without GST in some cases, and turnover is inclusive of GST in some cases. To the best of my knowledge, most people we have advised not to include GST as part of the turnover and take it as a liability so that the input credit can be set off against the output and the balance can be remitted. This is the practice which is adopted almost by all my clients. There can be instances where people include GST, in which event you'll have to take the GST also as part of turnover. But when you are adopting the exclusive method of entering turnover in your books of account, it is the turnover without GST which will be taken into consideration for determination of the limit of 1 crore. If a person, the next person is, if a person engaged in profession has a receipt of over 50 lakhs, then the provisions of section 44AB B is applicable. He has to get his books of account audited. Now, when there is a person who is a doctor and he dispenses medicine along with consulting, whether you have to treat it as business or profession. Whether yesterday when I was discussing this, one question came up, whether the doctor can adopt 44 AD for his dealing in drugs and medicines and 44 ADA for his profession. No, it is very attractive for someone to think that so far as the business of medicine, dealing with medicine is concerned, we can choose the 44 AD route and pay 8%. And so far as the business profession is concerned, we can adopt 44 ADA route and pay 50%, treat 50% as our income. But ladies and gentlemen, there is one snag. This cannot work because 44 AD is clearly not applicable where it is, though it is an eligible business, eligible business will not include a profession. So if you are a professional, you have no authority, no right to adopt 44 AD. So you are outside the purview of 44 AD. So you can only go for 44 ADA when you say the sale of medicine is a composite receipt for the consultation itself, the medicine, and it's a package. You do everything as together and the bill is raised for professional services. Because in there are instances where the doctors give medicine, but they do not have GST registration. If you disclose this as sale of medicine, they don't pay any GST on the sale of medicine. If it is a professional receipt or a hospital services, it is exempt from GST. So it is better to say these are all professional receipt or hospital services. And if it's a total hospital service, then we can say it is a business carried on by the doctor and it will be under 44 ABA. 44 ABC. If a person declares income below the limits prescribed under 44 AE, 44B, 44BB. 44D, where the profits are declared at less than 50% by a professional, then he has to obtain a tax audit report and furnish. 44 ADE, where the business declares income below the deemed profits under section 44 AD4. That is where you declare less than 8% or 6% as the case may be. You will have to file an audit report under 44 ADE. Here, reading 44 AD5 and 44 ADE, you will come to know, if you read them together, if a person gets his books of account audited for 1 year under 44 ADE and files a report under 44 AD4 and files a report under 44 ABE, he has to continue it for 5 subsequent years. He cannot revert and say, I will adopt 44 AD route of 8% or 6%. He is disentitled to that claim. But the same disentitlement to the claim is not available when for a professional. He can adopt 44 ADA for 1 year and then go back to 44 ADA, 44 ABD for the next year, then 44 ADA for the 3rd year. There is no disqualification for the professional to switch from 44 ABD and 44 ADA. Again, who can get the benefit of 44 ADA? There is a minor issue. All professions are not covered by 44 ADA. Only such professions as specified under section 44 AA within brackets 1, subsection 1, are covered by 44 ADA. You might be a professional, but you may not be carrying on the profession of law, accountancy, medicine, engineering, interior decoration, or technical and consultancy, or a film artist. If you are not any one of them, you cannot adopt the 44 ADA route. It is not, you are a professional, no doubt. But if it is not, suppose you are a consultant for, maybe you are a culinary consultant. You consult on how to cook food. It's a profession. But this profession is not covered by 44 AA. Or you are an astrologer. You are a professional. This astrologer is not covered by 44 AA. And the astrologer or a Vastu expert, he cannot claim benefit of 44 ADA. He has to go through, it is a profession, and he has to, he cannot give only 50% and get away with 44 ADA. He has to go through the regular route, and the 44 ADA. Okay. Then
unmute.
మామూలు ఇగురు వచ్చినట్టుంది అందుకని కష్టపడ్డట్టున్నాడు ఇగురు కోసుకొని లేకపోతే బండ ముదురు చేస్తాడు.
Madam, can you mute yourself?
Shravan, please mute everyone and then sir can unmute and speak. Shravan, are you available?
Okay, okay. No problem, sir. There, she has unmuted. She had muted. Okay, let's go.
Okay.
then this small difference between the see these small issues regarding the profession and which profession can get the benefit of 44 ADA, you should keep in mind, and you should not adopt 44 ADA route for a person who is not in the profession covered by section 44 WA1. And what happens to a company? What happens to a company or an LLP or a cooperative society which is required to be audited under any other law? These companies, these entities are not subject to audit under 44 ABA. They are subject to certification because the proviso to section 44 AB says they need not be subjected to audit under section 44 AB, but they should attach whatever is part of the audited statements under the relevant law and provide the information required in Form 3CD. So this 44, wherever companies, wherever you are giving Form 3CA in general, wherever you are giving Form 3CA, in the class, you should adopt the, you should state that the audit has been done under proviso to section 44 AB. This is very important, and class, as we go by that, we will see how it is important. Now, first class, I'm just trying to touch upon such classes where there had been difficulties or where there had been some errors while filling up the classes. So only such classes which in my opinion are important. Now I'm not going through all the 44 classes. I'm just going select classes which are very, very relevant. Some classes are very rudimentary. The name of the assessee, PAN number, address, all those things. Now nobody ought to teach you on how to fill up that. The class 8, this deals with the specific what I said, 44 AB, whether it is a proviso to 44 AB or 44 ABA or 44 AB B, C, D or E. This is very relevant because the UDIN generation also refers the same classification. And when you generate the UDIN, you have to also give the tax audit report is certified under which proviso or which subsection of 44 AB. The same description has to be incorporated in Form 8, in column 8. Another important thing is when you are signing the audit report under 44 A, B, C, D, and E, they are not included for the number of tax audit assignments a chartered accountant can accept. See, there had been, I am not a member of the disciplinary committee or anything. I have been told by my friends in the council that there are a lot of cases where the auditors have crossed the statutory limit of 60 in tax audit, and they all been found guilty, it seems, only pending for award of penalty, which is before the Supreme Court. This is what I gathered from some of my friends And we may not do it intentionally, definitely not, but it is better to have a track of the cases where we have signed the 44 AB reports. Then class 8A, this is an important class which has been introduced from 1420, and this class has a amendment for the current year 21-22, where you have adopted the 115 BAC or BAD. You will have to mention whether you are going to pay tax as what is popularly known as the new regime of taxation, or under 115 BAD, or earlier whether you adopted 115 BA, BAA or BAB in case of companies, where you will pay either 22% or 15%, depending on the section under which you are exercising the option. This option has to be exercised, and this has to be reported so that it is linked to the Form 10IE, which you are required to file. And also, there is a corresponding adjustment in class 18 of the Form 3CD regarding the WDV of the assets, which is to be adjusted. Unless you make a disclosure here, there will not be, you will not be permitted to make a WDV adjustment in the class 18. And if you fail to do that, there could be, assuming the system is very well established post this solving of glitches, there could be a 1431 notice saying that you adjusted the unabsorbed depreciation, whereas you had not chosen this, and therefore why the additional depreciation should not be disallowed. Disclosure is required and class 10 regarding the nature of business. So it is also a very rudimentary thing, but I urge you to choose the correct business code, because for one reason, there is a very strong data mining and data analytics operation happening at the Government of India. Government of India is spending huge sum on data mining and data analytics. The result will be, when they have this database intact, all the businesses across the country can be compared with each other on comparable basis. When you are not giving the correct business code, or if you are giving a wrong business code, your case might be compared with the uncomparable case, and thereby you might be in for some scrutiny. To avoid that, give the correct description as per the business code which has been published, and ensure that it is not changed. Suppose you are given to this year, next year do not change it. If it is to be changed, give a reason why it should be changed. Because you may not have changed the business, but you should not change the code. List of books to be maintained and list of books examined, and the location of such books of account. So it is generally the rule that the principal place of business and every branch of the business should have the books of account required to be maintained under 44 WA. These books could day book, cash book, ledger, stock book, all those things must be listed by you in the list of books maintained. And wherever you are examined such books, give the list of such books examined. There is a school of thought which requires that, which advises or which suggests, please disclose the bank statements also along with the list of books examined. And it has a reason. That school of thought has a reason. If by chance your client has a bank account which has not been disclosed to the department and also to you, You can say this was not disclosed to me at all, and I have made a disclosure in my Form 3CD class 11. I was not part of this, and you will not be accused of any misconduct. So better to disclose the bank statements. It all depends on the individual's decision whether to disclose the bank statement or not. But it is mandatory to disclose the books of account maintained by the organization and the books of account examined by you, and the place. The place is very relevant because this is the place which will be when there is a, may God forbid, when there is a survey or a search, when you have mentioned something to be maintained at X place, you are required to have the books there. And if it is not there, then there is a misstatement. So please ensure that you are mentioning the correct place and address where the books are maintained. It can be the principal place of business or it can be the administrative place of business, but it cannot be the address of an accountant or a chartered accountant. Both are wrong. And in smaller towns, the client's standard reply when he is faced with a survey is, the books are with the chartered accountant. It was never with the chartered accountant, but they keep saying it is all with the chartered accountant. It is. So in order to protect yourself, at least you should give the correct place where it is maintained. ICDS disclosure and ICDS adjustment. Friends, in the experience of mine in the past 3-4 years of this faceless assessment, any notice that is shot out by the National Faceless Assessment Center, first question is ICDS compliance. You have to respond to this even before they ask for any specific question. They say why the case has been taken up for scrutiny, A, B, C. First, ICDS compliance, ICDS disclosure, whether any change, whether you are complied with the ICDS, whether there has been a proper disclosure, whether by application of ICDS, whether any change is to be made to the profit and loss account has to be disclosed in class 13. See, this class 13 requires certain disclosures which are not in the accounting standards also. For example, accounting standards 2 dealing with valuation of inventory does not deal with valuation. It excludes specifically the valuation of services. It is not applicable. But ICDS says what is the value of unbilled services as on the closing date, which we have to disclose. And we have to disclose the method of valuing, the cost formula for valuing the inventory and the value of unbilled services. Secondly, ICDS makes another requirement of disclosure on revenue recognition. Have you recognized, in case any amount of revenue is not recognized during the year due to any uncertainty, please state the nature of uncertainty and the amount of such income. Whether we will have such an issue on hand at all, yes, we will. We will not recognize the withheld amount in any contract as part of the current revenue. Our TDS certificate issued by the person will say the total value of the contract. He would have withheld 5%. We will not account that 5% as part of the receipts because it is a contingent receipt. We do not know whether we will get it or not at all. We will only recognize 95%. So in such cases, disclose this 5% as the amount of revenue not recognized because of uncertainty, and what is the nature of uncertainty and what is the quantum. This will save you and your client from the requirement to give an explanation for the mismatch in 26 AS and the income. Because these are all items which are constantly compared by the system. Amount entered in 26 AS, so much. Amount disclosed in the profit and loss account, so much. There is a difference. Why these should not be adjusted? We get a 1431 notice. The reason, if we can say this is due to this reason, or it can be sometimes, if you are going to take the credit for TDS the subsequent year, there is a place in the ITR that this credit is being carried forward. You please mention that this credit is being carried. I'm sorry. This credit is carried forward for the subsequent year because the receipt is going to be in the subsequent year. So make such disclosures in this class 13. Otherwise, there can be, and it is mandatory. You have no choice. You have to disclose what is the amount of uncertainty which is there in the recognition of the revenue and what is the amount involved in due to such uncertainty. If there is a construction contract, all the disclosures as required in AS7. If it is a government grant, which is very rare, all the disclosures required under AS12. And if it is borrowing cost, the disclosure is the same as AS16. There are certain issues in borrowing cost. You will have to capitalize the interest only up to the date on which the asset is put to use. Once the asset is ready and fit to use, let us say today we have been affected by the pandemic. We would have established a facility and the facility would have been up and ready to use. But due to pandemic, we may not be able to use that facility. The interest portion, which is there beyond the date when the asset or the facility is ready to use, can be expensed off and will have to be expensed off because it is not due to the difficulty of getting the asset in place. It is due to extraneous consideration, extraordinary situations, and therefore even AS16 says that these amounts can be expensed off. Accordingly, you expense off expenses or interest, though the asset is not commercially exploited, but it is ready to use and could not be used due to the pandemic. Disclosure of all provisions. As I told you, there are exemptions in the account applicability of accounting standards, but the ICDS requires disclosure of provisions. Here, you will have to disclose the opening balance on each provision account, what is the amount transferred during the year, what is the amount credited to the such provision, what is the amount debited, and what is the closing balance. For each provision, you have to give this information. Now, method of valuation of stock. This is another issue which we have to grapple while filing the Form 3CD, because 145A categorically states that any tax which is irrespective of the fact that it is recoverable in future by the assessee has to be included in the purchases, sales, and closing inventory. Now, we have taken a stand that GST is not to be included in sales, but the 145A requires that it has to be included. To comply with the provisions of 145A, make an annexure by adding the value of GST to opening stock, purchases, and closing stock and sales. And there will be a variation in the gross profit or the net profit. That variation can be attributed to the GST which is credited in the closing stock, which is to be remitted before the due date for filing the return. So in any event, the effect of 145A adjustment will be revenue neutral. Nonetheless, there should be a compliance to class 14. You cannot say no, because we have not done that. In the P&L account, the question in for class 14 is whether the profit and loss account includes any taxes and duties in reckoning the value of closing stock. You are not included. So you will have to give an annexure that after including this, what will be the impact on net profit or the total income, which will definitely not change vis-a-vis the profit already disclosed. This class 16 is a very, very important class where it underlines the need for a proper management representation. Friends, many of our clients will be distributors of cement, steel, or fast-moving consumer goods and various other products. They will be receiving incentives. They will be receiving gold coins. They will be receiving scooter, motorcycle, car, or foreign trips. These things will not be disclosed to us at all. We will not know because it is not entered in the books of account. But that fellow would have gone outside India and the company's cost. It is every expenditure is footed by the company. So it is a perquisite chargeable to tax under section 28. We have to take a letter of representation that he has not received any of these perquisites. See, you may ask me how anybody else will come to know of this. During the course of the assessment for the year 18-19, when the NFAC was doing the assessment for the first time, we received certain notices in respect of our clients where they have received some gifts from the major supplier in the form of gold coins, and these persons were asked to explain whether they accounted the gold coins in as their income or not. So today, with the integration of data and transparency because of computerization, it is very easy for somebody to get to know what is happening. Please advise your client to disclose whatever gifts which he has received from his suppliers as part of his income. Many cement dealers, I know, they get gold coins at the end of the year. These gold coins are never reflected in the books of account. Somehow or other, we get to know that because during the what you call as social engineering, when we talk to clients, they come out with some information. So you make use of such information and include it as part of the total income of the assessee. It is better to do that ourselves later than being found out. Another thing is there is a customs duties website. This customs duty website, just like our 26 AS under the Income Tax Act, hosts the details of the drawback and cash assistance given in respect of each exporter. So when you are finalizing the tax audit report, please access with the help of your client the customs duty website or the customs duty portal and find out whether the cash assistance or drawback accounted for by your client is the same as it is in the website of the customs duty department. This class 18, we touched upon this class 18 during the opening on section 8, class 8A also. This requires an adjustment of any unabsorbed depreciation or any additional depreciation pending adjustment for the balance of 180 days to be made in the opening WDV for the assessment year, only for the assessment year 21-22. And this is the second addition or alteration to Form 3CD this year. Payment of contribution, this ESI EPF contribution. Friends, this had been a very, very difficult condition to comply with because there had been different decisions. There was actually one decision which was leveraged by us was very, very sensible. When you say the contribution received from the employee is an income within the meaning of section 2 within brackets 24. When the payment is made, it is only the income of the employer which is paid. It loses the character of contribution. It becomes only an employer contribution. Only section 43B shall be applicable. Unfortunately, the Madras High Court in Unifac Consultancy did not agree with this, and they said any delayed payment of ESI and PF beyond the due date for payment prescribed under the relevant act shall have to be disallowed under section 36. Now, the act has also been amended from 1421 that once you are delayed the payment without any exception, if you have delayed the payment, unless it has been condoned or extended by a general order, the ESI payment, which is or the EPF payment, which is attributable to the contributions received from the employees, have to be disallowed. And if you do not disallow it, the CPC keeps adding this as your income, and it keeps sending you 143 1A adjustments. So be sure to disallow this, or if you do not mention it properly, there is a query again. If you say in class 20A, there is a delay, and if you don't match it in your memo of taxable income or computation of your income in the income tax return, there is a query automatically shot out by the CPC that there is a mismatch between your form 3CD and ITR, and adjustment is required. So ensure that this does not happen. The various disallowances, only one thing which I would like to say on this, when you are reporting the various disallowances, capital expenditure, personal expenditure, penalty, or any advertisement in political brochure, when you are reporting this, please take care in the case of companies not to report any personal expenditure, because under the Companies Act, we are giving a report that no personal expenditure is being debited to the profit and loss account. Now, when you are reporting something in form 3CD that it is a personal expenditure, either we are contradicting ourselves or the statutory auditors of the company, which is not correct. Classify that such expenses as expenses not allowable under section 37. Then 40A, this reporting is required regarding the tax paid on profits. All the taxes which are to be paid under the as income tax, wealth tax, there is one decision which says cess is not tax on profit, but I do not agree with that decision. Please do not rely on that. This has to be disallowed as an expenditure. Then coming to what payment to non-residents. Here, we have to exercise a lot of our faculties to find out whether the payment is, first of all, chargeable to tax in India. There was like a Zomato, there was one other company which was based in Holland, Dutch company, which has been merged with Swiggy today. They were doing services of delivering food. This company was charging commission from the suppliers of food. On the question of tax deductibility of this company, when we checked, the company gave a certificate that it does not have a permanent establishment in India, and therefore tax was not deductible in India. So whenever you come across such instances, please ensure whether tax is first deductible. Section 195 says, whenever the income is chargeable to tax in India, tax has to be deducted. Suppose you are buying a capital asset from outside India, the income is not chargeable to tax in India. So no tax is to be deducted. Or when a person is executing services outside India for you, suppose there is a huge exhibition in Germany on equipments and machinery, and you are advertising in the German company, German magazine, and you are making the payment in foreign exchange. That payment is it tax deductible in India? It is not, because the services are rendered outside India. The person receiving the services renders the services outside India, and you are getting a services done outside India. It is not taxable in India. So whenever you are certifying something under this class 21, you will have to verify whether the income is taxable in India. Another important issue in this connection is, in the case of transactions like Swiggy, Zomato, and other operators, the food chains or the merchant who sells goods like to Flipkart, all these persons, they don't receive the payment. They don't make the payment of commission to Flipkart, Amazon, or Zomato or Swiggy. When the bill is collected from the customer, these intermediaries deduct the tax, deduct the GST, and take the commission and give you the net. How will you deduct tax on the commission? You cannot deduct the tax on the commission because you are not the payer at all. You are only receiving. Only now, with the amendment to section 194 M and N, these deductions are covered. Otherwise, the person who is receiving the payment and paying the commission, he cannot deduct the tax. The commission is already received by deducted by the person who is discharging it. And again, I'm telling you, in all these cases, please ensure whether the income is chargeable to tax in India as per provisions of section 9. And only if the income is chargeable to tax in India, tax is to be deducted, and only such payments where there had been violation has to be reported. So similarly, payment regarding 40A 1A, whenever there is a payment which has not been tax has not been deducted, please report it, and when it has been paid subsequently, please report it too. 40B, this is a simple arithmetic exercise which needs not much of an explanation. 40A3 and 40A3A, these two sections are real challenges. We do not know whether the checks are cross account payee or not, because we don't have the counterfile these days. If we'll have to examine the bank statement and find out whether they are all by RTGS, in which case the UTR number is available. So you can verify and state that it is account payee check. Or some banks give the names of the beneficiary when the check is collected. So you are sure it is account payee check. In certain cases, we will not be able to find out whether it is account payee check or not. So in such cases, please obtain a management representation that all checks were cross account payee, and they let them certify that the checks were cross account payee, and based on that certificate, you issue this confirmation that the payments were made by account payee checks. Please do not hesitate even for a minute to take such a representation, because we will be held responsible. Now, another question related to 40A3 is, what happens when a person makes payment in cash to the bank account of the person anywhere in India? Today, you can deposit cash in my account from Kanyakumari to Kashmir. If somebody makes a payment into my bank account, whether it is hit by section 40A3 or not, the answer given by the Madras High Court is it is hit by 40A3. That was a case where a construction company made payment to a contractor who was executing the contract in Visakhapatnam, and it was remitted to the bank account of the person who was working at Visakhapatnam in cash. The court held it is in violation of section 40A3 and disallowance was justified. So there are instances like this where, then this is very common. Many a times, many of our clients remit cash into the bank of the supplier and say it is payment has been, the 40A3 has been satisfied. No, it is not satisfied. It is still not by account payee check or account payee bank draft crossed. The reason for upholding, why this has been upheld. See, there is no trace. See, what is the mischief that was sought to be cured by 40A3? You are booking false expenses by payment in cash. Though you are making the payment to the bank account, only thing is the cash is getting monetized or it is reflected in the bank. The genuineness is still in doubt. As long as it is cash, the genuineness is in doubt. So it is not permissible to claim the benefit of Rule 6DD in respect of payment made into the bank account of the supplier, and it will not be exempt under section 40A3 or 40A3A. Gratuity provisions, provident fund provisions, all these things have to be included in this class. And when the gratuity is provided for and not paid, it is to be disallowed under section 40A7. Only the payment of gratuity on payment, the payment alone is allowable in the year of payment. When it is paid, you are entitled to claim the expenditure, not in the year of making the provision. 14A disallowance. This is one of the favorite questions asked by the NFAC. Every time you get a notice, the 14A application, whenever your balance sheet carries information regarding investments in shares and mutual funds, an inevitable question is whether the application of 14A is there and whether you have disallowed. Even if it had incurred any expenditure in relation to an exempt income, if you are incurred or not incurred, please prepare an annexure. Say that I have not incurred any expenditure in earning the exempt income. It is my own funds which have been you invested in these assets and no interest has been paid. There is no other expenditure incurred for realizing the income, therefore no disallowance. If you have made any expenditure, notwithstanding Rule 8D, the total disallowance cannot exceed the exempt income. The disallowance has to be restricted only to the amount of income exempt, not anything more than that. There is no requirement for disallowance. So under these circumstances, please make an annexure regarding the disallowances under 14A. Payment to relatives. Here also make a clear, get a clear representation from the management regarding who are all the relatives, and based on that identify whether any payments have been made to them. You are required only to disclose the payment, need not have to express any opinion whether it is at an arm's length or not, whether it is reasonable or not. You make a very simple statement that this is the amount, this is the payment, these are the relatives to whom it has been, these are the relatives to whom it has been paid, and there ends our responsibility. but we have to go only by the declaration of the management to know who are all their relatives. Unless otherwise, we are ourselves related and disqualified from conducting the audit. Cessation of liability under section 41. See, this is one of the typical cases of current scenario. Today, we are seeing several OTS settlements where people are getting payment not waived. They are getting some loans waived. They are getting interest waived. They are getting haircuts for principals. Whether such payment is to be assessed as income in the hands of the person receiving the OTS benefits. The answer is found in the decision of Commissioner of Income Tax versus Mahindra and Mahindra 302 CTR, page 223, Supreme Court, which is very clear. It says where there is a sacrifice by the lender on working capital or interest portion, then such is taxable under section 41(1). Where there is a sacrifice on term loan, which had been used to fund the assets, and a portion of the term loan is waived, then it is a capital receipt not subject to tax. So when we get to see any OTS application regarding our client, we have to apply these norms and then decide whether it is taxable or not. See, there has been always a proposal to consider creditors who have not been paid for more than 3 years as income chargeable to tax under section 41(1). They even invoked that the creditor who is outstanding for more than 3 years, his debt is barred by limitation, and therefore it is no more payable. It has ceased to exist, and we will include it as income. Ladies and gentlemen, this provision of Limitation Act is not applicable to trade debts. Limitation Act and the limitation of 3 years for realization is applicable only to loans given on pronotes and other documents where the loan has been lent and it is to be repaid. In the case of trade creditors, this provision of Limitation Act has no application. Nonetheless, we had in the past come across queries from the Income Tax Department during the course of assessment that it has crossed 3 years, so it has to be added as liability which has ceased to exist. And of course, as we all will expect, it was added in the assessment stage, and in the appeal we got the relief. Now, please be informed that it is not taxable. The other classes 28, 29, and 30 deals with section 56 and its application, where shares have been issued at a higher price than the fair market value. Here, Rule 11A has been amended, and as per which the chartered accountant is not required to is not competent to certify the value and using DCF technique. It is only the merchant banker who is competent to certify the value using DCF technique. A chartered accountant still has a role in valuation of shares, but it is limited to his expression of opinion on the value of shares based on book value or breakup value. It has to be only you will have to go by the balance sheet and find out revalue the assets, revalue the liabilities, and give a certificate. If you are the chartered accountant is disqualified or is not entitled to give a certificate of valuation of shares using DCF, however competent he might be. It is only the merchant banker or the person, a registered valuer, who is registered on the valuation Valuers Act, he can give a certificate. So based on such certificate, you will have to determine whether the company has issued shares at a price far higher than the fair market value. The Foreign Exchange Management Act says preference shares which whenever issued to a non-resident or a foreign institutional investor has to be issued only as a compulsorily convertible preference shares. For such compulsorily convertible preference shares, the merchant banker can adopt DCF to value the shares of the company. When the shares are simple preference shares, DCF technique cannot be applied to arrive at the value of the shares at which the price at which the shares are to be issued. So you make a distinction and come to a conclusion whether it is to be brought to tax or not to be brought to tax. In the case of immovable property, of course, the registrar gives a certificate, this is the fair market value, and when it is not disputed, then 56 is applicable. But since the branch is in Nellore, this will be of interest to for the local practice. 56 is not applicable to agricultural land. There are a lot of agricultural lands as defined under section 214, and if there is any variation in the price of the agricultural land in and around Nellore, then the 56 is not applicable. It is because the section says the capital asset. The section uses the word capital asset. Capital asset excludes agricultural land. So if there is an agricultural land where there has been a mismatch in the guideline value and or the fair market value and the stated value, 56 or 50C will not apply. Loans and deposits accepted or specified sums taken under 269SS. We understand loan, we understand deposit. There is a extraordinarily good decision of the Madras High Court which says what is a loan and what is a deposit. It has relied on the decision of the Lahore High Court while making what is a loan and what is a deposit and what is the difference between the two. When a person gives a loan, it is the duty of the person giving the loan to make a demand on the borrower and collect it. When it is a deposit, when the person gives a loan, it is the duty of the borrower, to seek the lender and repay. When I take a loan from you, it is my duty to seek you and repay it. It must be originating from the borrower. In the case of a deposit, it is the duty of the depositor to demand the money from the person with whom it has been deposited. This is the difference between a loan or a deposit. Whose duty is to do what? If it is the duty of the borrower to seek the lender and make the payment, it is a loan. If it is the duty of the depositor to demand it, then it is a deposit. What is a specified sum? Specified sum or advance. See, this word specified sum, if you go into the history of the legislation, you will find out this had been introduced only to avoid again a mischief. We were classifying certain amounts which are received in cash to get over 269SS and T. We said it is an advance for purchase of property. So the advance is not covered by 269SS and T. We wanted to escape, there was an escape route. So they wanted to plug that escape route and said specified sum is an advance received in respect of property. Rent advance, it is not definitely an advance for property, though it is in respect of a property, It is not an advance for a property, and it is not covered by 269SS. Then whether a capital contributed by a partner is an advance, it is not. Whether a loan taken by a relative from the wife or close relatives, there are decisions which says it is not hit by 269SS. There is a decision of the Madras High Court in Idayam publication which says that loan taken from a director of a private limited company, which is as good as a partnership firm, and it should be treated as the capital and it need not be covered by 269SS. Unfortunately, this favorable decision has been reversed, or it has been overruled in Vasan Healthcare Private Limited, where there had been a continuous loan from the director, repayment to the director on a continuous basis. Even now, in my opinion, the decision of Idayam publications will have force in cases where it is not on a continuous or a regular basis, it's a one-off case. Then you are entitled to the relief under section of the decision of Idayam publications. But if it is on a continuous basis, like a current account where the director deposits and withdraws the money, then you will be hit by 269SS and T. Make an analysis of the transactions and report. Do not fail to report whether there is an acceptance of deposit or loan in account payee check or not. Earlier, from 1984 till about 2017 or 18, the Form 3CD was worded whether the loan had been accepted otherwise than by account payee check. Now, the clause 31 says whether the loan had been accepted by account payee check. It is a confirmation in the positive. You will have to state whether it has been accepted by account payee check or bank draft. And if you say yes, you should be sure that it has been accepted by account payee check or bank draft. Here also, I again request you to get a management representation and ensure, and nonetheless look into it. The simple management representation will not absolve the responsibility cast on us. Find out to the best of your efforts whether it has been accepted by account payee check or not. Have proper notes and also support it with a management representation. There is other provision 269ST. It is double-edged. You will have to give details of receipts in excess of 2 lakhs. If in respect of an event, in respect of a transaction, or in aggregate in a day from a person. And also the list of payments which you have effected in violation of 269ST. Here, the information is to be given both where the payment has been made by account payee check or account payee bank draft or electronic fund transfers, and also payments made by check or drafts which are not cross account payee. Both the information you have to give. Class 33, TDS compliance. TDS compliance is really tedious. You will have to first take into consideration what is the amount of expenditure claimed under each head which is subject to tax deduction. For example, freight charges. You will have to find out what is the total amount of carriage inwards, what is the amount paid to a lorry, and what is the amount which is, what are all the amounts which are covered by 194C, where he has got declaration, whether he has filed such declaration. People get declaration that they own less than 10 lorries and therefore no tax is to be deducted. They keep it very safely in their records. They do not know that they have to file a form along once they receive this declaration. That they don't do. But courts have excused this non-filing of the information to the income tax department. If you had obtained the declaration, that is sufficient compliance, at least for the purpose of tax deduction. You'll have to verify this. See that these contracts are whether the tax has been deducted at the appropriate rate. See, there are two schools of thought on this. Section 40A 1A states where any in respect of any expenditure, tax is to be deducted as per provisions of chapter 17B and has not been deducted, or having been deducted has not been remitted to the bank, remitted to the account of the government. See, the word used is where in respect of any expenditure, tax is deductible in accordance with chapter 17B. So if you are deducting tax at a lower rate, for a professional it is 10%, you deducted 2%. You are not deducted it in accordance with the chapter 17B. A strict interpretation will be, you have not complied with the tax deduction provisions as per chapter 17B. So you are liable for disallowance. So I'll give you a classic example. You are making pay, this is an example which has arisen in my practice. You are a hospital. You are sending samples for blood testing, and you are getting a report from the diagnostic center. Whether this payment is a contract payment or whether it is professional services. Two views are possible. It is a simple contract. He collects the blood and he is contracted to give me a certificate. There is an exercise of professional skills. Nonetheless, it is only a contract. It is including all consumables, everything. So I will view it as a contract. I will deduct tax at 2%. It is a professional service. You have to deduct tax at 10%. Assume that I have deducted tax at 2%. There can be a disallowance if you say it has not been done in accordance with the provisions of. But there are decisions in favor of the assessee that 40A 1A is not a section to impose any penalty for a violation. It is only for ensuring tax has been deducted. As long as tax has been deducted and remitted, then there is no cause for disallowance of the expenditure. Because there is no need, how will you will have to pay only additional tax. There is no revision of the TDS return regarding the amount, only the amount of tax paid has to be revised. There is no impact on the disclosure per se. The disclosure, they want to know whether this has been, tax has been suffered on the payment or not, and whether it only goes to certify the genuineness of the payment, and it has happened. As long as it has happened, then there is no requirement to disallow it. Quantity particulars. Whenever you are dealing with the case of a trader, especially multi-line distributor, or a person who deals in several products of the same category, textiles, for example, or any departmental stores or anybody, they do not have a proper stock account. They do not maintain proper. That stock is taken at the end of the year, and the major, even some large distributors, they do not have proper stock account. Medical distributors have stocks. For FMCGs have proper stock account, but various other dealers who are dealing in pulses or other agricultural products, they do not have proper stock account. In such events, please take care to mention that the client, the assessee has not maintained proper stock books and we have not been produced any records. In the absence of such records, we are unable to furnish the information. Make a clear disclaimer and also make a qualification in Form 3CB subject to the assessee does not maintain proper stock records and we are relied only on the closing value of inventory furnished by him and certified by him. You make a qualification in the audit report. This qualification we have been doing right from 1984 and we have not found any resistance from any of our clients. So you can very well do this. Management representation, yes, you have to educate them to get the management representation and similarly getting the statement signed by all them. That's also to be educated. They think it is only the auditor who has to sign. What is that you are going in the reverse? You are asking me to sign, but they do not understand. So that requires education, especially in Mofussil areas. Now, trading, you'll have to give the details of finished goods and all items, major items traded. Manufacturing, raw material consumption, wastage, and finished goods you have to give. And whenever you give the information, please give the information under the appropriate column. See, very often I have noticed whenever people are dealing with cases of jewelers, they give the information under the head trading. Any jeweler is an indirect manufacturer. He gives out the gold or silver, gets it manufactured and then sells it. So there will be wastages and that will not get reported if you are giving it as a trader. So you should give in such cases information under the classification of manufacturer. Ratios. All these ratios have to be provided for the turnover, and the Form 3CD says that you have to give the working. The working doesn't mean that you have to give what is the opening stock, purchases, closing stock. Give the information of turnover, gross profit, turnover, net profit, and percentage. Closing stock of finished goods, not raw material. Closing stock of finished goods and turnover, stock turnover ratio. Materials consumed and materials production achieved. Yield. These information you give preferably as an annexure because the form does not have enough space. Finally, regarding the 43 and 44 GST requirement, it has been stayed by the it has been deferred till 1/4/22 because of the pandemic. Once it comes, especially in the case of large assessees, it will be a very, very difficult thing to comply with. It is a GST audit in itself. That is why the GST audit has been dispensed with. It is a GST. You will have to give the details of all the, I said 31/3/22. Sorry, given it as 31/3/20, it is to be read as 22. It has been, once this from 1/4/22, you will have to give the details of whatever inputs you avail, whatever is the expenditure, link it to the P&L account and link it to the GSTR 2A and GSTR 3B and give a final. So this will be a GST audit in one go. Better to advise our clients to equip themselves for furnishing this information, because in the case of large companies, large entities, it will be very difficult to comply with this particular class, and you cannot say disclaim that I have no information to give this. This is a information already available in the GST, and you are only going to make a reconciliation, which you have to do it. Friends, I think we have covered the entire Form 3CD, and I now let the floor open for any discussion. And we are also about 15 minutes away from the closure of the meeting. The house is open for discussion.
Thank you, sir.
Welcome.
Now I request any of the members, if they have any queries, they can ask.
Yes, Prabhakar sir, you can unmute and you can raise your question.
Hello,
Yes, sir.
sir. Am I audible, sir?
Yeah, you are.
During the course of your discussion,
Yes.
you have just touched the area of 56-210.
56-10, yes.
Yeah, 56-210 is not applicable to agricultural lands.
Yes.
But the plain reading of the section, it says, section 56-210 is applicable when sum of money or property is required, is received by an individual or HUF on or after October.
No. 56-10 is regarding gift. You are talking of gift, where there is a different capital asset. It uses the word capital asset. You see.
I'm talking about that only, sir.
I think from the point of 50C, sir is telling maybe 50C, sir, difference in valuation. 50C. You
Even here, where you acquired any capital asset.
Okay.
Where the consideration with the word use your capital asset.
Yes, sir. Sir, here, but 56-210 is not talking about any capital asset. It is talking about property or money or property. Property means they are not distinguished. It is not distinguished anywhere that the capital asset for the capital assets. I mean, for agricultural lands, it is talking about only the property or money which is received without consideration or inadequate consideration. So
Yes,
when property means property includes both immovable property and movable properties. But 56-210 has not given any exemption for agricultural lands or capital asset, which is not a capital asset. That is my opinion, sir. Please just clarify.
Unfortunately, I don't have I am at home. I do not have the Income Tax Bar Act with me. You just get a SMS to me.
This is the Bar Act, sir. This is the act. I'm just reading once again.
No, see the explanation. Immovable property.
No, that is what, sir. It is not talking about any. Capital asset. It is not talking about any capital asset. It is talking about money or property.
Yes, sir.
So
Sir wants you to read the explanation also, sir. In Bar Act, please read the explanation. Means the meaning of immovable property. Sir wants you to read the meaning of immovable property if it is there. If it is there, please see, sir.
What is that, Sujit? Is it exempts agricultural lands?
No, sir.
It says capital asset.
In the explanation, it is given capital asset. Huh?
Yeah.
So then it is the outside the scope of 56-210.
Yes.
Thank you, sir.
Right.
Sir, one more doubt, sir. Whenever
Yes, sir.
The assessments happened in VAT or CST or now in GST, whatever the demand is there, that demand we are showing it under expenses in profit and loss account.
Yes.
So, since whether it can be covered under prior period item or what, sir?
No. That's a very good question. Very good question. I wanted to talk about this, but it slipped my mind. See, the question of prior period expenditure is largely defaced under the Income Tax Act today. When, see, 43B, be it a prior period expenditure, when is it allowable? It is allowable only in the year of payment. So, even if it is a prior period expenditure, as per 43B, any tax cess or any liability has to be allowed only in the year of payment. Only when I make the payment, it is allowable. One more thing regarding 40A, 1A. Suppose you are making a interest payment. You are making payment regarding the salary which you are related to the earlier period because of a wage revision. Wage revision in case of under the Workmen's Compensation Act or the Factories Act, there are decisions which says the liability arose only. Now you are paying for your directors additional salary worked from 2 years before and making the payment, or interest not claimed now given. All these payments are covered by 40A 1A because the payment which is tax deductible, which in respect of which tax is required to be deducted in accordance with the provisions of Chapter 17B has not been. So even if I made the payment in the earlier year, you wouldn't have allowed me because I not deducted the tax. I have deducted the tax only this year. So in this year, it has to be allowed. You apply 40A 1A the inverse to get this claim.
Okay, sir. Regarding the same issue, sir, I would just want to enhance the issue. Suppose in VAT or GST, when there is a demand, in the demand, definitely there would be an interest portion or a penalty element in that. So
yes,
that interest and penalty, whether it will be disallowed.
Interest is compensatory in nature and it is allowable. There is a decision of the Andhra Pradesh High Court itself that the interest is allowable, but not the penalty. Interest is allowable. When interest was charged even at 24% under the Andhra Pradesh Sales Tax Act, the Andhra Pradesh High Court has held it is a compensatory charge and it is allowable. So interest is allowable on the sales tax payment or the GST payment, but not the penalty. Penalty is for an offense. So it is clearly excluded from application of Section 37 by the proviso. But you can make a very, very tangential claim, but it will still be struck down by the application of the interpretation under Hayden's rule. The section proviso to Section 37 says making any payment in respect of any expenditure which is for a purpose which is in violation of law. Whether making a fine is for the purpose, by making a fine, are we violating a law or are we complying with the law? Paying a penalty or a fine, we are only complying with the law. It is not for violating the law, which is the purpose of payment is not violating the law. But it's a very difficult argument to stand, and it will be struck down because what the section wanted to avoid was payment of penalties, and penalty is definitely not allowed. See, some high court, like what I said, they said cess is not a tax on profits and it should be allowed. Some high court might probably give you a decision in your favor, but it's not correct.
Sir, earlier discussion regarding the agriculture land, I just checked. Jaipur
Yes.
IT has held in favor of the SC.
Yes.
But for a rural agriculture land, not the urban agricultural land.
No, urban agricultural land, definitely not, sir. Urban agricultural land, we are not talking about. I am only talking of 214.
So, Prabhakar sir, it is in the case of ITO versus Trilok Chand Sen, 2019.
Yeah, I know that. Urban
So
agriculture, without any hesitation, it is not
yes.
exempted.
So,
It is
rural agriculture land.
It is a capital asset, but there is one case law which I don't remember. In that case law, I have to check it. But that is also not in favor of the assessee. That I will check up and talk to you personally, Sujit. There is only one case law I came across.
Yes.
I don't remember that. So even that, for that also this provision applies. Then probably the explanation might have changed the scenario.
Further, it was upheld by Pune ITAT also. So Jaipur ITAT decision was upheld by Pune ITAT also.
Yeah, there is no doubt about it. Urban agricultural lands always has a capital asset. What Sir said is correct.
Yes. So rural agriculture land 50C exemption is there. 56(2)(10) is also there. 56(2)(7) also is there.
Yes.
Okay. So any other queries, members? Sir, please, sir.
Speaker, sir.
Yes,
So
sir.
suppose if the consideration received in the case of an agricultural land, suppose the fair market value as per the SRO value is 1 lakh. Suppose the consideration received is 1 crore, which is actual value represented in that particular area. What are the consequences?
Nothing, sir. As long as you are able to see, make the proof, as long as you are able to prove that you did receive 1 crore in respect of the land, notwithstanding the price being 1 lakh, as long as you are able to prove the genuineness of the transaction, there is no consequence. See, the reason is why I am saying is, see, the payment is not proved properly, you will definitely land up facing the addition under section 68 to 69D, that it is an unexplained receipt or unexplained income. As long as your buyer and the seller agree it is 1 crore and the transaction is by banking channels, there is no issue. There is no issue at all.
Is there a need to
Actually, the consideration is received only through banking channel properly. Everything.
Yeah, but the document will be for 1 lakh. I understand that. The document you will write for 1 lakh and issue the check for 1 crore. You have an agreement.
No, even in the document also the consideration received is 1 crore.
Then there is no issue. Then there is no issue.
So you are paying stamp duty on that entire
You are
amount.
paying stamp duty.
Yeah, I am paying stamp duty also.
Then there is no issue. See, I am looking at a situation where the stated consideration is only 1 lakh because the guideline value says 1 lakh. But I claim that I received 1 crore. But I registered the document only for 1 lakh. Then,
no, sir. Actually, what I'm in one of my cases, actually the consideration they received is far exceeding the actual sub-register value, and it is not an agricultural, sir. It is in the case of urban agricultural land, and it is the party is ready to pay the taxes also. But
then there is no issue, sir.
Here, the only thing they missed is the buyer, he has not deducted 194 IA.
Okay.
So my assessee is a seller.
Okay.
For agriculture land, 194 IA.
194 IA is still again not applicable, but it is. He says it is not an agricultural land as per provision, as per 214.
I'm talking about the rural, not rural, urban agriculture land, sir. I'm talking about
urban agriculture land also is exempt, sir, for 214A purpose.
As long as it is within 8 kilometers or within the municipal limits.
Yes, sir. So for 194 IA, even though it is an urban agricultural land, TDS need not be done. It is only for vacant site, building and the apartment. Agricultural land is excluded. Yes, sir.
194 IA says any immovable property not being agricultural land. But what is agricultural land? If it is, you can still see that's beside the point. Let us go to the question. Now your buyer has not deducted tax. What is the consequence? And you are paying the tax.
My assessee is a seller. So So my problem is whether the genuineness of the transaction, see the the consideration, everything received only properly document also written properly. Everything is
Yes.
pakka. But
Sir, 194 IA has not been, is a duty of the buyer which he has failed. Okay. Now, you are the seller and you are paying the capital gains and you are going to give, so what is the problem? You will give a form 26A and section 200 excuses that fellow from being viewed as a assessee in default, and 40A 1A is also excusing you, excusing him from disallowance, and it is followed by following the decision of Coca-Cola of Supreme Court, where the primary liability has been discharged, the vicarious liability shall not stand. That non-deduction is not an issue of proving any genuineness. As long as both the parties have agreed. See, this is very easy. There is no way somebody can doubt it.
Okay, sir. Any other member, if you have any question?
Seshay sir, are you having any questions, sir? Okay, I think.
So if the members do not have any question, we will proceed on to the closure of the session.
Hello.
Sir? Yes,
Hello.
sir.
Yes.
Sir, Vijay, sir.
Sir, that interest paid on late payment of service tax duty is also allowed, sir?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. It's a compensatory in nature.
Okay, okay. Thank you, thank you.
Welcome, sir.
Okay, sir. One thing I noticed or I felt throughout the session, sir, even though this topic is heard for several times, means every year at least we address it once, I felt many new points surface, sir.
Oh, thank you.
So that is one thing I felt because that kept me going throughout. That is one thing I have to commend. It is very commendable, sir, because this is a
Thank you.
topic people go through every year.
Yes, yes, yes.
To learn every time new, it is a challenge.
Every day we have to learn, sir. To be where we are,
Yes.
we have to run.
Right. Okay, Vamsi, now we can proceed with closing of the session. Please propose vote of thanks.
Thank you, sir, for your wonderful presentation. I hope today's session has enlightened many of the members. From my knowledge, what I understood is in today's session, classification of applicability of accounting standards for assessees based on their turnover was the new point for me. And the OTS classification, OTS norms, how to taxability of OTS issues with regard to working capital and term loan was also clarified for us. And there are many new issues that were discussed and settled here. So I take this opportunity to thank on behalf of all the members of Nellore branch, to our faculty, to his wonderful presentation to our members. And I also thank all the members who have participated towards the entire session and made the session a grand success. Thank you, everyone, and have a nice day. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.